Good morning. We welcome you here. Thank you very much for coming and participating in this very important conference, and particularly in relation to what's happening in the Sudan for the last year or so, and the enormous number of people who left the Sudan, who are living now in exile. I'm sure our speaker will refer to this in more details about what happened. But first, let me thank a number of people who have contributed to this conference in terms of organization. I thank you for coming to us as usual. And I thank also the speakers, particularly Professor Manzoul Asal, who came from Bergen, Norway, and also Salman Abdallah from Jordan. The Middle East Center, we thank for allowing us to use this lecture theater, and in particular to Professor Eugene Rogan, the director of the Middle East Center. We thank also St. Antony's College for providing the facilities, as you may have seen, and later on the lunch and tea and the reception. Thank also the co-chairman of the conference, Richard, who is sitting in the front. I just want to take a few minutes to talk about this theme. Why we have talked about diaspora in the past, but it was very urgent. I thought that it is time to talk about the diaspora now in view of the political situation in Sudan. The few notes is that in the past, diaspora is created either by conquest, the Turkish conquest, the Egyptian conquest, the British, or through migration. People willingly leave the Sudan to work outside. Now, for centuries, Sudan has been, so to speak, recipient of diaspora, Arabs, Greek, Italian, African, Ethiopian, Armenian, etc. As you have seen them, and of course, I'm talking about Sudan before the separation in 2011 into Sudan and South Sudan. And also, Sudan has been an exporter of diaspora to the Gulf state, US, UK, Europe, Saudi Arabia, and even in Australia. So you've got communities of Sudanese and South Sudanese in these countries. Coming diaspora have left their cultural and social impact. I remember the 1960 Khartoum was full of those clubs, European clubs, Armenian, Italian, Greek, Syrian clubs, of course, the German, as well as the American. Now, in addition to what has happened to the Sudan, the external diaspora, people leaving, there has been internal diaspora. Khartoum was, until recently, was full of these tribal clubs. The Jaliyin, the Shaigiya, Kordofan, and things. I remember I used to go to the Shaigiya clubs in Sajana, part of Khartoum, and the idea that people socialize with each other and help each other. So there was an internal diaspora. The urban center is full of people from different parts of the Sudan coming, seeking work into these clubs, into these urban center, whether Port Sudan, Atbara, Khartoum. The internal diaspora is created due to an economic situation, larger population, fewer economic resources, surplus population have to seek work somewhere outside. But those recently, in the 60s onward, now the fashion is to leave the Sudan, and the destination at that time was the Gulf state. In the earlier 50s, the Gulf state asked Sudan government to send some technocrat bureaucrats to help establishing the civil service in the Gulf. A number of my friends who worked there for 2 to 3 years, and they come back to Sudan. So Sudan has been very helpful in this respect to the Gulf state in particular. Now, meager resources, as I said, larger population, meager resources force people to seek job outside in the urban center. And this is still the process. Khartoum during my time in the 60s was 500,000. Khartoum, North Omdurman, now it's about 7 or 8 million. And those people are coming from the outside, settling in Khartoum, seeking employment, seeking work. However, the advantage of the diaspora, the external diaspora, particularly in the Gulf, has been very useful recently by supporting relatives who are in Egypt. 1.7 million Sudanese have sought refuge in Egypt. Egypt doesn't provide asylum at all, but depends on people, their relative working in the Gulf or in Europe or in the States to help them financially. So the recent conflict between the RSF and the National Army, Sudan, really has created a lot of problems and chaos, killing people, looting, destroying their properties, factories. A number of my friends have suffered from this. They lost everything, more or less, their cars, their houses, and even content of their houses. This represents really a different diaspora from the past. The people leaving the Sudan seeking work and seeking help, helping their people back. This is a different one. They are fleeing the fighting between Sudan National Army as well as the RSF. Now, this represents a loss not only of income, but a loss of people, loss of able people, and it's resulted in displacement and destruction of property, as you may have seen on television and reported in newspaper. Now, I think the impact of this will be felt for years to come. Now, whether Sudan remain as it is, whether there will be a reconciliation or result into deep disagreement as well as hatred towards each other, remain to be seen. But it is very sad for us when we experience the good days of the Sudan. Of course, at that time, in the 60s, 70s, there was a problem of the civil war in the south. South Sudan suffered 2 civil wars, and that's also created another diaspora for Southern Sudanese seeking refuge in United States, seeing in the neighboring countries, Kenya, Uganda, Ethiopia, as well as Italy, and even to Cuba. They went to Cuba. So Southern Sudan is not immune to the diaspora. And so I'll stop here because I don't want to take more time because we have a very tight schedule. So I will now hand you to Professor Manzoor Asad, who has been with us twice before